Welcome back to Quest for You. I'm Janine, and this is episode 374. In 1987, former President Ronald Reagan came to West Germany. He stood in front of the Brandenburg Gate, which was the dividing monument between East and West. He pleaded on behalf of the majority of people in all of Germany who were against the wall, and called on the Soviet President Mikhail Gorbachev to tear down this wall. As my country neared the end of its 41-year existence, I began to build my inner walls. You see, I had been promised a happy life, happier than I already had, but now it was supposed to look good on the outside as well. Growing up in a small village may sound quaint, but familiarity also breeds gossip. As a child raised by her grandparents, with an unknown father and an absent mother, I was an outsider. More concerningly evaluated by teachers, constantly asked unanswerable questions by my peers, always the topic of conversations by those people whose houses I passed on my long and lonely walk home from school. At times, I longed for the normalcy of a typical family. As a child, I wanted nothing more than to be just like everyone else. It came as a surprise when my mother proposed that I move in with her. She had newly married, and they both decided they needed me to make the family complete. Children are adventurous and more adaptable than we as adults often presume. They take chances when we are too afraid. They give people and opportunities a go when we rather play it safe, especially when they are convinced by us that everything will be better. When I turned 10, to the deep grief of my grandparents, my clothes were packed for me, my last name changed legally, and I left a place that I didn't realize until much later was my home. To start over, in a place that didn't feel like home, but one that looked better to the outside world, but one that caused a storm in my inner world. Because the story of family and happiness I was told turned out to be a lie. Everything I knew that defined the word family for me was missing. Dinner time in the kitchen was me eating by myself because everyone was either working or in a bad mood. Weekend trips to historic castles and ice cream shops were replaced by dinners at restaurants with my stepfather because my mother had migraines and needed everyone out of the house. Playtime moved from a protected property where I could always hear my grandparents' voice to a nearby forest that fulfilled my yearning to explore, but also made me feel incredibly alone. I tiptoed around the tiny apartment, trying not to get anything dirty, out of order, and make myself invisible as best as I could. I missed my grandparents, who were only a few kilometers away. But being able to see them became a great instrument of punishment, which was utilized randomly, depending on the direction of the wind. I lived for the weekends, when I could get on my bicycle and make the hour trek across country roads and steep hills to spend a few hours in bliss and childhood happiness. As my body began to change from a child to a teenager, hormones kicked in, and the question of who I am began to gnaw on me. Who are you? I know I don't need to ask you whether you have asked yourself this question. We all have, as early as late childhood, often by beginning to question our name, maybe because others made fun of it, or it was changed, as in my case. Janine Petra Grossman. This is my name, and I don't like 2/3 of it. Grossman is the adopted last name from my stepfather. His role was more of a negotiator between my mother and me due to our inability to communicate effectively. But he has long disappeared from my life, and I never had parental feelings for him when I lived with him. Petra is my mother's first name, and I don't have to prove to you that my relationship with her wasn't on best terms. I never used this name. It's her name, not mine. this leaves me with Janine. Janine. I still remember the way my grandmother said it. Last I heard her say it was over the phone when I called her almost every Sunday from the US. I am Janine. It's the name I use today to introduce myself wherever I go. It's the name that you hear on this podcast. It's the name I respond to. Everything else feels like a different person. Who are you? The question never ceases, and it shouldn't. Who we are is the person we see ourselves as. It's our identity, and it starts with our name. Janine Petra Grossman. Whether I like it or not doesn't really matter. Whatever memories it brings up, they don't matter either. What matters is what I decide. My life began with my name, but my name is just a shell. It doesn't define who I am. It simply is a name. Janine, that's me. Who are you? That is a much bigger question. In that cold and impersonal room in my parents' apartment, which was a pass-through room without any privacy, sterile, clean, and lacking a feel of homeliness, I was torn between two worlds. The one I longed for desperately for 2 weeks, and the one I cried over every time I had to return to it. Unsure and disillusioned, I lost my sense of home. I didn't know where I belonged. I didn't know who I was. And a profound need to escape all of it began to take hold of me, to go out into the world and find the answers to my questions. But as children, we are stuck, dependent on those who care for us and powerless to make any life-changing decisions. Unable to change their surroundings, children often make adjustments on the inside. Some turn silent and withdraw from the world, unwilling to participate in activities. Others act out their unresolved feelings, sometimes aggressively. We all have either seen or been those kids, with feelings we couldn't yet express, with questions nobody answered, and with a desperate need to fit into this world one way or another. Signals of stress manifest in different ways in children. At age 6, on vacations my mother took me to, I began to wet my bed again. At 12, I took random pills from my mother's medicine cabinet, which gave me jitters for an entire night. The deep hole I felt on the inside quite often welled up with tears on the outside. Lots of tears, sometimes for no apparent reason. My grandmother sent me to a psychologist, but I was never really able to answer all her questions. When pain can't find an outlet, walls go up. The continued adjustments we make to adapt to the challenging circumstances can become obstacles later in life. Barriers that hold us back from expressing the person we are. Obstructions to living the life we want. Those walls help us cope with our worlds of instability, unpredictability, and adversity. They keep us alive and as somewhat functional members of society, still able to accomplish our goals and meet our responsibilities. Walls protect. They keep us safe. They help us orient ourselves within the complicated maze called life. I settled. I adjusted to this life that started to feel really, really hard already. And I started to dream. And even though I was still too young to escape it, I somehow, unknowingly maybe, began to search. Thank you, my friends, for listening to some of these snippets as I think back of my life. Some of it I shared yesterday. Today is another portion. I'm just in the process of working through some of my past, and I appreciate you sharing this time with me, and maybe some of these thoughts resonate with you as well. Much love.